Immigrant Support Network, and today we will be presenting the Assimilation and Aculturation of Immigrants. My name is Noshin, and I am a junior at Macaulay Hunter, and I am the VP of Events for Macaulay Immigrant Support Network, otherwise known as Mission.
Hey guys, so my name's Christina, and I go to Queens College. I'm a sophomore, and yes, Queens represent. And I'm the VP of Outreach for Mission.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm a junior at CSI, and I'm one of the co-presidents of the club.
My name is Laviva. I'm also a sophomore at Queens, and I'm the other co-president of Mission.
Okay, so just before we start, we want to give you a rundown of what to expect from our presentation. First, we'll start off with an introduction, and then we'll go into what assimilation is, and then what acculturation is. Then we'll apply both of them to the immigrant experience, and then finally we'll wrap up our presentation. And you can use these icons on screen to guide yourself through the rest of our presentation. And so, just before we actually start, who are we? Who is Immigrant Support Network? I'm calling Immigrant Support Network. We are a club with the mission of representing and advocating for both documented and undocumented immigrants within Macaulay, CUNY, and New York City. We want to provide an open space for these students to share and discuss their own experiences, give them a platform to talk about and learn about the current immigration issues occurring in the world, and also give the opportunity to participate in advocacy through volunteer work and just other campaigns. And so, now to actually begin, has anyone heard of the term acculturation or assimilation before? And if so, in what context did you hear it? And or what does it mean to you? So any takers from the audience? I know we're running a little low, but yes?
Okay, so I learned, I really delved into it in my Asian, about how Asian American, or Asians coming from Asian countries have to kind of, I can't not use the word assimilate, but like assimilate into the United States culture and adjust their not morals,
The customs?
yes, to more United States. Sorry, that was a terrible explanation, but that was good.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to share any thoughts on these terms and what it means to them? Or yes?
I've never heard of acculturation before, but I have heard of assimilation. And I've only really heard it in regards to the context of immigration, like from a, in my opinion, negative and really xenophobic term, which is like, we only will allow you to enter into this country if you assimilate to our cultural values, if you assimilate to our traditions. And I think that's not necessarily fair, and it doesn't necessarily emphasize the value of diversity and what strengths that brings. So yeah, I kind of view assimilation negatively, really.
Right. Yeah, those are very good thoughts. Lizzie, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, so it sounds like you guys already have a really good idea of assimilation. We are going to dive deeper into acculturation later on. But just to give a more concrete definition of assimilation, Paul defines it as the process whereby individuals or groups of differing ethnic heritage are absorbed into the dominant culture of a society. So let's go break this definition down more. Some of the indicators of assimilation include taking on traits of a dominant culture. So we see that assimilation is a two-way process where it happens between two cultural groups, and each group would contribute in different proportions of making the eventual blend of both these groups. The alien group will not only contribute to the host, but it also retains some of its own ways. Some of the other indicators include being socially indistinguishable from other members. You can see a loss of culture and history, and all in all, this can all conclude into more discrimination. I wanted to ask you guys if you guys think that it could be voluntary or could this be involuntary? Do you think that it can be encouraged or pressured? And I know someone brought up an historical example of Native Americans and indigenous people, but can you guys think of any more historical examples?
I think they brought up like Asian culture specifically. So I don't know if you want to dig deeper into that or if anyone wants to answer any of the questions.
I think it's fairly consistent across all immigrants. I think that there are cultural characteristics that are undervalued in U.S. culture related to education and work, and I feel like parts of culture that are deemed unnecessary or unhelpful to success within the U.S. Are systemically shed, basically.
Yeah, so you brought up a really good point that many times that assimilation is involuntary, and it's basically pressured by systematic parts of the government that would shun others in order to assimilate. There are cases where assimilation can be voluntary, but it's still very rare for a whole minority group in order to replace its cultural practices completely, like 100%. Yeah, so moving forward, I also want to bring up some of the different parallels that come with assimilation and how it can both be beneficial and detrimental to immigrants. So some of the positive effects include immigrants could have better economic and social opportunities, and this can lead to them feeling safer and have a greater sense of belonging and a higher quality of life. But on the other hand, assimilation can make immigrants feel like they had a loss of identity. Therefore, they may struggle with mental health as a result of being distant with their culture.
Okay, so I know we spoke a little bit about assimilation, about what it is, and now what does it look like? So here we see a picture, well, two pictures side by side of the 3 Lakota boys, and this was taken in the 19th century. So I want to kind of get your thoughts on this, guys. So do you see any differences in the pictures, and if so, like what stands out to you, or do you guys have any thoughts? Yeah.
Headdress, or maybe no headdress, lack thereof.
Anyone else?
I feel like the picture on the right has just more of like a Western feel to it. Like it's very like poised and like, you know, hands on shoulders, versus the other one's kind of like just more like relaxed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah?
I don't know if someone else said this already, so my bad if this is repetitive, but I think like the haircuts are big, because I know that hair is very important to a lot of native cultures.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you guys. So that's exactly also what I saw when I first saw this picture, and I like how you pointed out the posture, because I didn't notice that until like the second time I saw this picture. So here we see an example of assimilation. So we see that these 3 boys were basically stripped of their Native American identity, and some context for those of you that don't know, because I didn't know this. This was taken in March 1881. It's 3 young boys from Wyoming's northern Arapahoe, and they were transported to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, and the school was meant to strip them of their indigenous identity and to forcibly assimilate. And I know Labiba talked about in our previous slide whether, you know, assimilation can be voluntary or involuntary, and here we see it was clearly involuntary, and they were westernized.
Yeah, so now that we've seen an example of the Lakota boys basically being stripped of their indigenous identity, I wanted to bring up how many people would describe that whole situation. And they would describe that using the melting pot theory. That is a common analogy which is used to describe cultural assimilation. So it's basically used to describe how different cultures would melt together in order to create a new culture. From this theory, it suggests that people can integrate into a dominant society, which can promote multiculturalism, but at the same time, this process can harm diversity and can lead to cultural loss. Finally, to conclude our discussion of assimilation, I want to bring up this quote from Gans. who states that nonetheless, assimilation and mobility were and still are independent processes. Immigrants can assimilate without being mobile and vice versa. So to break this down even more, he has this saying that immigrants don't need to assimilate or they don't need to let go of all their culture in order to ride up the social mobility ladder, especially in the United States.
So now we've discussed assimilation, it's time to discuss our other topic, acculturation, which is the process by which an individual or group adopts the practices and values of one culture while still maintaining their culture of origin. Now, some common associations with this are that it's a two-way process, as people in majority culture usually adopt aspects of minority cultures they come across. An example is the embracing of cuisines from different countries in the U.S., as immigrants in the U.S. also embrace American foods. This can occur on the group or individual level. And like assimilation, this can occur voluntarily or be required, as it can happen unintentionally after immigration, but there are also cases where immigrants are required by law to acculturate. Now for acculturation, there can be 5 different outcomes of the process, with the first being assimilation, which is when more importance is placed on fitting into the new culture than maintaining the original one. The second outcome is separation, which is when very little or no importance is placed on adapting to the new culture and the original culture is maintained. This is more common in societies that are culturally or racially segregated. A third outcome is integration, which is when maintaining the original culture and embracing the new one are equally important. This is common among immigrant communities and communities with a large amount of racial or ethnic minorities. A fourth outcome is marginalization, which is when no importance is placed on either retaining the original culture or embracing the new one. This group often becomes overlooked in society, and this can occur in societies with cultural exclusion. And for our last outcome of acculturation is transmutation, which is when maintaining the original culture and embracing the new one are equally important. But instead of integrating the two cultures, a third culture is born that's a blend of both.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So we talked about the melting pot theory, and now we're going to discuss the salad bowl theory. So the salad bowl theory relates to acculturation, and it is called, quote-unquote, a heterogeneous society, so it's a diverse society. Unlike assimilation, where everyone is trying to fit into one role and look essentially the same. In salad bowl theory, people retain individual aspects of their culture, and this idea proposes a society of many individual, quote-unquote, pure cultures, in addition to the mixed culture that is modern American culture. So you see this cute little image here on the right of basically people in a salad bowl. So when you look at a salad bowl, you see all the different colors popping out at you, right? You see the tomatoes, you see the cucumbers, you see the salad, and while they're all a part of the salad, you know, they all have their distinguished features, they all have their distinguished characteristics, and that is essentially what acculturation is. It's retaining the native traits while still being in a different environment. Yes?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So is acculturation just a reformulation? Like, is it trying to reformulate assimilation, or is it a completely separate concept?
I would say it's a separate concept, because assimilation essentially is when you're completely adopting the new culture and just trying to fit in. And we're going to see a picture later on comparing the two. While acculturation is more, even though you're in a new culture and you are, obviously when you're in a new environment, you're going to adopt the features in the new environment, but you can still retain the ones from your native home and kind of integrate that in. So for example, we live in a perfect example of a society. So New York City, we have Little Italy, we have Chinatown. Astoria is like Little Greek, right? So it's like while we're all living in New York City, we can still travel to these places and kind of see the little countries within New York City and just try the new foods, experience the new cultures. So that's essentially what acculturation is. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, perfect, no problem. And so this is an image that we see side by side, acculturation versus assimilation. So we see on the left side acculturation, we have different people walking, right? And we see that they're different because they have, in this picture, they have different colors representing their different attributes, their different traits. And on the right side, assimilation, we see one person that's trying to turn everyone else into exactly how they look. So everyone's trying to be red, and on the left side, everyone is different colors. So this is essentially what acculturation and assimilation are.
Okay, so thank you, Christina, Labiba, and Sarah, for presenting a little bit about what acculturation is and what assimilation is. Before we move on, we just want to have a little checkpoint and test your understanding of these concepts because, as Sienna brought up, like they can be a little confusing and can intermingle. So we have a few examples, and you'll just let us know, do you think this is assimilation or acculturation? And then if you would like to, you can let us know why. So our first example is, a couple immigrated to the United States together from East Asia. Upon arrival, they legally adopt Western names and subsequently give their children Western names as well. Assimilation or acculturation?
That's assimilation. They're giving up an integral part of their identity, which is the names that they were given at birth, so that they would be more appealing to the country that they currently inhabit.
Yeah, let's check the answer. So you're absolutely right. This is assimilation, and it is for exactly the reasons that you mentioned. So names are a signal of cultural identity, and by coming to the United States and adopting these Western names, they're stripping that part of their culture from themselves and then also from their children. So there's this idea of assimilation continuously, continuing through the generations. And I want to bring up an interesting fact that we found when trying to come up with this example. So the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy and Research, they found that as parents stay longer in the United States, the index of foreignness for the names that they give their children decreased dramatically. And this was looking over like a 40-year period, and this was a 50% decrease. And so that just tells you how influencing assimilation is when you're in that environment, and how the effects of it don't only stop with you, but pass on. Second example, a family immigrated to the United States from South America. The family eats out half the week to try American foods in their city, and the family cooks their cultural food at home the other half of the week. Assimilation, acculturation, any takers?
Acculturation, the family is not giving up their cultural identity, so they are able to have the best of both worlds. They're able to hold on to their own cultural identity while also enjoying and experiencing American culture.
Nice thought. Let's check the answer. You're indeed right. This is acculturation. Specifically, this is the outcome of integration, where the individuals kind of equally take from both cultures, their native culture and the new culture that they're within. And so here we see that in terms of the food that they're experiencing, where half the week is their native food and half the week are new foods. And so we see this equal experience of both cultures. Third example, a family immigrated to the United States from Europe. The parents enroll their children in a school at which the children continue to learn the history, customs, traditions, and more from the home country. Do we think this is assimilation or acculturation? Yes?
It would definitely be acculturation.
Right. Why do you say that?
They encourage, well, not encourage, but they continue to teach the children at home their own history, customs, and traditions from their home country.
Let's check the answer. You are indeed right. This is acculturation, but this is a different outcome of acculturation that we're seeing here. This is separation. So in separation, or for separation rather, we see that these individuals, these immigrants, they are holding on and retaining to their own culture even within this new society. And so it's an interesting aspect of acculturation, and it's a different outcome of it. And so we just see the different ways that acculturation can arise. And finally, I know you must be tired of us trying to engage you guys, but our fourth example, is a family immigrated to the United States from Africa. They do not bring any of their clothing from the home country and adopt an English-only rule within the household. Assimilation or acculturation?
Assimilation.
You want to explain that further?
It's pretty clear that they like not abandon, but like feel like they have to abandon their culture. So.
Right. So let me just see the answer. We see that you are indeed right. It is assimilation. And I like that you brought up this fact about how they feel forced to abandon their old culture. That is an aspect of assimilation that we see where individuals feel forced to give up their customs, their old traditions, to adopt the new ones for the sake of blending in, trying to feel acceptance. And so, now that I know, or now that we know you guys are experts at distinguishing between assimilation and acculturation, we're going to go more into the challenges that immigrants experience in the face of both.
Yes, thank you, Nashin, and thank you guys for engaging in this little fun activity. So now we're going to see some challenges that immigrants face with assimilation. So when immigrants come into a new environment, it's clearly a drastic shift. Everything, depending on where they came from, is going to be different. The way of life, if they're used to transportation, driving cars, or even the way of cooking. Maybe they cooked on like wood fire outside of their homes, and now they have to adjust to stovetops. So all of that can be very overwhelming for individuals migrating to new countries. And in addition to that, we have the stress brought about by learning the new language, ways of life, and acquiring new skills. And I'm currently trying to learn Italian, and it is hard. And even though I may see some Italians here and there, and it can be a little easier to try and communicate with them, I can't imagine how difficult it might be for someone that's literally leaving their home country, coming into a new country, and trying to learn a completely different language. And it can be stressful. And we see that this process may not be completed until the second or third generation after entry, which can be another additional stress because sometimes we want change to be seen so fast, but it's not until generations after that it can be seen.
Right, and to build on the challenges that immigrants face in the face of assimilation, when immigrants come to a new country, they're faced with this challenge of a power dynamic between their home country and the new country, where the home country is seen as inferior, and the new country, the dominant country, is seen as the dominant one, and more powerful. And so basically there is this idea that the immigrant is the one who must adjust. The immigrant is the one who must change their customs and everything about themselves just for acceptance within this new country. And so that just plays into the role, plays into the hopes and fears as well, which is the second challenge that immigrants face, where there's this fine line between the two, where yes, there's this new hope that they're in a country where supposedly, all backgrounds, all races, all religions, all languages are accepted, but there's this fear of whether they're presenting themselves in a way that will grant them this acceptance. And so there's always this dilemma between what to show and how much to show, and then how much to change to actually represent that. And then finally, there's this challenge of the lack of individualized support from the dominant culture. And that comes from the fact that because there's this forced assimilation and they are forced to give up all these different aspects about their identities, they're also giving up the challenges that they're facing, the issues that they're facing. And so when they're facing these issues, the dominant culture is no longer able to provide them individualized support for those issues. And so there's this idea of falling behind within that new culture, which leads to these other hierarchies that we see in these new societies. And so I believe a great example of that would be, next slide please, Sarah, what we see within the education of immigrant youth in New York City. And so a study, a 2012 study by the New York City Department of Education's Office of English Language Learners examined performance of 3 different language programs within New York City. And each of these programs have different language programming set. And so our first school has English Second Language, ESL, which is a manner in which assimilation is promoted because the students are learning just English and they're forced to learn just English. The second school has bilingual and biliteracy development, so they're incorporating both languages, but not to the extent that, they are incorporating both languages and both, the students are exposed to both cultures and the history of both. And then finally, the third school has ESL, so the assimilation aspect, but they're also offered bilingual native language arts. So they're not particularly exposed to both languages in the same way that they would at a different program. And so why do we bring this up? We see that the students who are given the chance to both learn English and develop their own language, they're the ones who perform the highest at 75.17% in terms of their overall average grade. Whereas the other schools with more ESL programming, meaning programs that promote assimilation, they're falling behind. And so this just shows that in the face of assimilation, these students, which is a prime example of where assimilation takes place, they're not getting the support that they need within this dominant culture, and that just leads on to more challenges within their development in that new society.
Yes, okay, and now we're going to see some challenges that immigrants face with acculturation. So, evident cultural differences can lead to prejudice and discrimination. So, we see when new immigrants come into a new environment, a new place, like Noshin was saying, sometimes they might be a little scared to show, their cultural roots and of how much of it to show, because they can easily be pointed out, and a lot of people don't take change greatly. They can be, people can say slur words to them, treat them, not in the best way, or just, it can create a very unwelcoming environment from, the country that they're migrating to, which can be very, very stressful. And a 2007 study found that people living in a salad bowl or acculturated society were less likely to vote or volunteer for community improvement projects. And this caught my attention because, if people living in a community aren't voting for the improvement within their home, within their society, then the people, that have lived there already are the only ones that are going to be making the decisions for them. And, it's very alarming because if they don't feel welcome, if they don't feel comfortable in making those votes and volunteering and making those decisions for themselves, then how will they ever really, grow and be able to move up the ladder? And the last point that we see here is acculturative stress theory. So this is the first time I heard of this theory, and essentially what it is mental and emotional challenges of adapting to a new culture. So a lot of people, we talk about mental illness now, and moving to an entirely new place, an entirely new environment, it's not easy, and it can bring a lot of stress mentally, emotionally. This can include anxiety, depression, identity confusion, which is what we see a lot nowadays, and just the difficulties of balancing preserving your home culture while also trying to learn and adopt the new cultures of the place that you live in, and just knowing, what social behaviors are acceptable, where can I do this, where should I, hide myself a little more. So that can bring a lot of stress on people that are acculturating.
Right, so now that we've examined the challenges of assimilation and acculturation for the immigrant, and we've given our mission for the club, we find that acculturation is better for the immigrant, for their success, and for their well-being. Which brings us now to the final discussion of how we can promote acculturation. So first off, there are counseling services. Our counselors or social workers with knowledge on immigrant students can aid immigrant students in adjusting to their new environments, and this can keep their connection with their native country. Counseling services can educate staff on also being culture responsive. Secondly, we see, like how Nosh was talking about before, there should be inclusive instructional practices where they assign texts about different identities and give students the chance to talk about their experiences.
Another way to promote acculturation is by integrating ELL students. One version of this is placing ELL students in classrooms based on how well they know the topic with bilingual teachers instead of basing it on their English proficiency level. Another version of this is developing dual language classrooms where ELL students and native English speakers learn both languages. And as we saw in Noshin's graph, this can help the average long-term grades of ELL students, as well as help ELL students and native English speakers to improve their native language and learn about a new one.
So those are examples of how we could promote acculturation on a more institutional level and a level of policy, but of course that's a bit difficult unless you're a policymaker or an active advocate for these interests. And so what can we do as individuals on the individual level to promote acculturation? And so we ask you first to reflect on who you are. What is your background? Ethnically, racially, culturally, religiously, where do you come from? And then finally, how do you represent your background to the world? If you're able to confidently say, yes, I do represent my culture, yes, I do embrace who I am, yes, I do share who I am, and that's great. That means you are acculturating, that you are holding on to those aspects of your identity. But oftentimes, we might not be able to answer these questions that well, especially that third question about how we represent our background to the world. And that's just a sign of the influences of assimilation in this society and how we are falling subject to assimilation. And then after you reflect on yourself, we're going to ask you to reflect on the people around you. Are you able to answer these same questions that we asked about yourself about these other people? And these are questions that reflect crucial aspects of these people's identities. And so if you are able to answer these questions, then of course that's great. But if not, which is often the case, then that is a sign that we need to take a step towards acculturation. So how do we do that? Encourage these people to tell their stories, and then after they tell their stories, empower them for sharing their story, taking that courage to share their story, because of course it's not always easy. And so our hope is that by first reflecting on who we are as individuals and the people around us, we're able to better promote acculturation by understanding the difference, and appreciating the diversity that's around us in terms of background, cultural background, immigration background. And hopefully this could translate to, in the future, or in the near future, changes at both the institutional level, the policy level, and eventually societal level.
We want to thank everyone for being a part of this discussion on assimilation and acculturation. We hope we can help spread some knowledge about these topics and the way they impact our lives. We want to again welcome you to our club and implore you to join us in reinforcing and upholding diversity and inclusion in Macaulay, and to help us to continue providing a platform for the voice of immigrants in CUNY and NYC. We have our Instagram here where you can follow us, our email, and also this QR code where if you scan it, you can join our club of Club Macaulay, and just ask us anything about the club and any events you want to participate in. I'm going to leave it up just for a few seconds in case anyone wants to scan the QR code, although also if you want to scan it after, just ask one of us. And then here we have our works cited page with all the research we've done. And then lastly, it's question and answer time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them.
Thank you so much, guys, for listening in to our conversation. Questions? Don't all jump in at once. Go ahead.
So I have a kind of like a hard goal right now. I don't know if we were talking. There was the idea of how in New York City there's like this like little like enclaves of different populations, and how it's such a rich community because of that, but also that fosters like the fact that New York City has like the most segregated school system in the country, right? So how do we encourage that like multiculturalism without like like pushing also for that segregation that we have right now? Like it's I don't know if that's a discussion that
No,
yeah.
that's a great question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I want to also go back to what like Nasha said, because obviously we know that institutional changes are very, very hard, and obviously they are the ones that cause the most change, so it's the ones that we want to push for. But I think just ensuring diversity within schools and maybe just promoting more diversity days, or just like Nasha was saying, having those classes where we can incorporate the home native language of students while also, you know, incorporating native things of like America and just blending those together so they don't forget their native roots, but also, you know, learning more about our country. Do you guys have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I would just want to say that I think like these neighborhoods are almost like these ethnic enclaves we see in New York City are pretty integral to New York City, and I don't see them going away anytime soon. So I think in order to change the systematic educational system that we see in New York City, there is a lot of things to be changed, and I don't think like just these segregated neighborhoods are the only reasons why we see our education system the way it is today.
I don't know if that answered it, but
It's a hard question.
yeah,
It was,
it's
yeah,
like a
it
deep
was just-
combo. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could also think about how, even though like we praise ourselves for this diversity within New York City, at the end of the day, most of these schools offer pretty assimilating instruction. So that is also what leads to the segregation, the fun behind these wide gaps in educational performance that we see in these students. So anything that could potentially change how we go about education in these schools could help with that issue without also deconstructing these different neighborhoods and emphasis on diversity within New York City.
And I just wanted to, it's like way past the time, but to, I guess, like give a shout out, Dr. Antonia Pantoja. She's a role model, just like one of the, like a mastermind of New York. She is the reason why we have bilingual education in New York City, and you know, like before, like Puerto Rican and just Latino children will come to New York, and instead of getting a bilingual education, they will be put into a special education and be considered like, you know, special needs, or a term that I'm not gonna use, but it was used like officially. And the fact that she saw that and she like actually fought the system is the reason why we have bilingual education now. So yeah, like Women's History Month just passed, but I always love mentioning her. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that input. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you guys for listening.